Nasreddin Hoja entered the marketplace, riding backward on his donkey. "Nasreddin," the townsfolk cried, "why are you riding backward?" He replied, "It's not I who am backward. The donkey is facing the wrong way." This, I believe, is the secret of wisdom in our time, knowing the world spins foolishly and pretending to spin with it. The greatest sign of wisdom may be in pretending not to have any, and the greatest fools? Those who fail to pretend. Like Nasreddin on his donkey, the wise throughout history have often found it safer, more practical, and even more enlightening to disguise their intelligence behind apparent foolishness. Perhaps the world indeed faces the wrong way, and it's the fool alone who sees clearly. Yet those who perceive themselves as wise typically have the least tolerance for mockery. As Erasmus sharply observed, "Hence if anyone turns up complaining that he has been libeled, he betrays his bad conscience, or at best, his fear." Sarcasm, mockery, and cynicism, the usual weapons of insecure minds, are often shields to hide the lack of anything intelligent to contribute. Making others look foolish distracts from one's own ignorance, but this is the tactic of those uncomfortable with their own limitations. For the intelligent, however, in a world that takes itself too seriously, playing the fool is often your safest and smartest move. For if you're going to play the fool, you must learn to do so without ever truly becoming one. Once a wise man carefully explained to his student that the secret of wisdom is to pretend to be a fool. The student, confused, asked, "But master, if I pretend long enough, won't I just become a fool?" The master smiled gently and replied, "Exactly." In a world like ours, dominated by the constant outrage of the ignorant and the impetuous, one quickly learns the wisdom of keeping one's head down when the mob begins gathering at the door. Since, as Erasmus wrote, the greater number of mankind play the fool, it often becomes necessary to march lockstep with fools, or at least appear to. Balthazar Gracian similarly advised, "Make use of folly," adding, "The wisest play this card at times, for there are times when the greatest wisdom lies in seeming not to be wise." He further clarifies, however, "You need not be unwise, but merely affect unwisdom." In other words, play dumb among the dumb. Yes, to the ignorant you will appear ignorant. Yet, as Gracian reassures us, he is no fool who affects folly. Rather, the true fool is only he who suffers from it. The vulgar will feel threatened by your intelligence or abilities, so one must play dumb when it suits them. The wise never reveal the full depth of their insight. Gracian cautions against being fully understood. Mystery, after all, inspires more reverence than clarity. Where dissent is insult, uniformity is praise, one must think with the few and speak with the many. Truth is for the few, as Gracian observes, whereas error is both common and vulgar. It is not always wise to speak openly against the mobs in a time like ours, if we care about our livelihood, or what is more, our sanity. In such times, the wise man is not known by what he says on the rooftops. Instead, he speaks with the fools in public, and has his own private thoughts and affairs. One does not change a world that does not want to change. Sometimes you just have to let the chips fall where they may, let the boat filling with water sink, because after all, it just might need to. But if you feel like you must speak, and believe me, I often feel the urge to give the stupid and ignorant a piece of my mind. I will teach you strategies for doing so while protecting yourself. If you take your wisdom into the world, conceal it with fool's clothing. Socrates is one of the great trolls of all time, next to perhaps Diogenes. The Socratic strategy is to feign ignorance whenever encountering self-proclaimed experts who are proud of the mediocre nature of their worldly wisdom. Summoned to court on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth, Socrates encounters Euthyphro, a priest renowned, at least by himself, for his knowledge of religious rituals and piety. Discovering Euthyphro at the court to prosecute his own father for murder, an action considered extraordinarily bold, perhaps even impious. Socrates senses an immediate opportunity for mischief. He asks Euthyphro eagerly to instruct him on the nature of piety, hoping ironically to use such newfound wisdom against his own accusers. Feigning admiration and humility, Socrates humorously suggests that, should anyone question his religious views, he'll claim he learned from Euthyphro himself. If he, my accuser, were to say that I innovate and improvise on divine matters, I could tell him that I've learned from Euthyphro, who has accurate knowledge of all such things. Euthyphro confidently agrees, proudly claiming no one would dare challenge his expertise without themselves falling under scrutiny. Encouraging this prideful confidence, Socrates enthusiastically exclaims he's eager to become Euthyphro's pupil. With careful naivete, Socrates then coaxes Euthyphro into a trap. When Euthyphro defines piety as doing what I'm doing now, prosecuting wrongdoers, Socrates, appearing politely confused, asks his good friend for further clarification. Euthyphro next suggests that what is dear to the gods is pious, prompting Socrates to gently prod him further. Come now, my dear Euthyphro, tell me clearly that I may become wiser. Yet Socrates cleverly leads Euthyphro to realize the contradictions within his own definitions. If gods disagree, which they do, then what's beloved to one god might be despised by another. Piety thus cannot merely be what the gods love, as it would lead to contradictions. Through strategic questioning, Socrates methodically unravels Euthyphro's definitions. Yet he continues pretending genuine confusion, humorously attributing the confusion not to himself, but to Euthyphro's elusive definitions. Your statements, Euthyphro, seem to belong to my ancestor Daedalus. If I were stating them, you'd perhaps mock me, claiming my conclusions run away and refuse to stay put. But as these propositions are yours, we need some other jest, for they will not stay put even for you. In Greek mythology, Daedalus was famed for crafting statues that moved themselves, shifting unexpectedly and unpredictably. Socrates humorously compares Euthyphro's elusive arguments to these moving statues, gently mocking his inability to offer a stable definition. Sensing he's been cleverly manipulated, Euthyphro defensively insists, I am not the one who makes them move around. It is you who are the Daedalus. To this accusation, Socrates responds innocently, deepening the irony. Indeed, it appears I am cleverer than Daedalus himself, for I can make other people's things move as well as my own. But the cleverest part of my skill is that I'm clever without wishing to be, for truly, I'd prefer your statements remain unmoved. Through this humorous, subtle mockery, Socrates shifts responsibility for the confusion entirely onto Euthyphro. Throughout, he maintains the ironic pretense of being a humble student, gently forcing Euthyphro to confront his ignorance without appearing overtly critical or hostile. As Euthyphro, increasingly frustrated and embarrassed, finally gives up and attempts to leave, Socrates continues his humorous pretended disappointment, ironically lamenting, Yet you are younger than I, by as much as you are wiser. What a thing to do, my friend! You've cast me down from a great hope I had, that I would learn the nature of the pious and impious from you, and escape Meletus's indictment. At this point, Euthyphro, who began confidently assured of his wisdom, leaves embarrassed, confused, and frustrated. Socrates' irony, his masterful feigned ignorance, humorous flattery, and gentle ridicule have effectively undermined Euthyphro's pride and certainty without openly humiliating or antagonizing him. It's easy to imagine Euthyphro walking home in deep self-doubt, no longer sure what piety truly is, realizing that perhaps true wisdom lies in recognizing one's own ignorance. Socrates' method proves extraordinarily effective precisely because it avoids direct contradiction or open victory. He never explicitly states what piety is or isn't. Rather, he appears perpetually ignorant and sincerely in need of guidance. This clever tactic leaves his interlocutor with no one to blame but themselves for the failure of their definitions. Even if they sense manipulation, they find no clear proof. Just as in ancient Athens, today we have no shortage of so-called experts who, as Erasmus wrote, knowing nothing in general, profess to know all things in particular. Yet openly challenging such individuals can be risky. As Gratian wisely warns, All victories breed hate, especially victories gained over one's superiors. Instead of the feigned ignorance and subtle irony employed by Socrates, you might adopt the fearless insolence and brazen humor of Diogenes, perhaps the greatest troll of antiquity. Diogenes hesitated at no opportunity to mock the powerful or expose hypocrisy through boldness and biting wit. When Alexander the Great famously approached Diogenes and stood imposingly before him, saying arrogantly, "Ask of me any boon you like," Diogenes merely replied, "Stand out of my light." His insolence wasn't reserved only for kings and conquerors. Diogenes delighted equally in mocking the pretensions of intellectual elites. When someone once accused Diogenes of ignorance despite being a philosopher, he replied unfazed, "Even if I am but a pretender to wisdom, that in itself is philosophy." Diogenes reserved particular scorn for Plato, whose abstract definitions and theoretical elegance he found pretentious. Plato had defined man as an animal, biped, and featherless. Diogenes, unimpressed, plucked a chicken, entered Plato's lecture room, and announced, "Here is Plato's man." Yet perhaps Diogenes' greatest wisdom was in his uncanny ability to turn insults back upon his tormentors. Often mocked by Athenians who called him a dog, Diogenes embraced the insult wholeheartedly. Once at a banquet, guests amused themselves by throwing bones at him, treating him literally like a dog. Rather than becoming defensive or embarrassed, Diogenes simply responded by performing a dog's own trick. He stood up and urinated upon the bones, claiming ownership. Diogenes understood a powerful lesson here, one that is as valuable today as it was in ancient Athens. The insults others cast at you lose their sting when you turn them back on your attackers. Most of us react defensively, angrily, or with embarrassment, exactly as our critics hope. Diogenes taught a better way. Accept their insults, own them, and even amplify them humorously. In doing so, you not only rob your critics of satisfaction, but expose the pettiness and foolishness behind their attacks. Humor and wit remain far more powerful and safer responses than anger or indignation. Exposing hypocrisy was one of Diogenes' favorite activities. He famously lit a lamp in broad daylight, wandering through the marketplace as if urgently searching for something. When asked what he was doing, Diogenes replied simply, "I am looking for a man." Yet perhaps Diogenes' most meaningful provocations were directed against injustice and abuses of power. On one occasion, spotting some temple officials leading away a petty thief who had stolen a small bowl from the temple treasury, Diogenes loudly remarked, "The great thieves are leading away the little thief." Diogenes' method of strategic folly is especially suited for those who are naturally bold, witty, and unapologetic, no less effective than the subtle irony employed by Socrates, but certainly more direct. Sometimes confronting authority or foolishness openly with humor and courage is exactly what's required. Ultimately, choosing between these approaches depends on your own temperament, circumstances, and willingness to play the fool boldly. Speaking of fools, this brings us naturally to the legendary Persian wise fool Mullah Nasreddin, whose playful absurdity, humorous antics, and genuine folly reveal profound truths about human nature and ourselves. Nasreddin understood perfectly that people secretly believe themselves smarter than they truly are. And who could resist exploiting such self-delusions should a perfect opportunity happen along? Once when he found himself between jobs, Nasreddin wandered through the streets, enduring ridicule as a beggar. Townsfolk amused themselves by offering him a choice between two coins, a large, valuable one and a smaller, less valuable one. Each time, without fail, Nasreddin chose the smaller coin, sending his tormentors into fits of laughter. His friend Farrukh finally took pity and asked, "Nasreddin, why don't you ever take the bigger coin? You'd quickly become richer, and people would stop mocking you." Nasreddin smiled knowingly and whispered, "Ah, you might be right, but consider this. If I ever took the larger coin, they'd stop offering me money altogether. As long as they believe I'm the greater fool, I'll never run short of coins." The fool and his money are soon parted, goes the ancient adage. And who are we to question timeless wisdom? Perhaps, after all, Nasruddin merely collected a modest tax on arrogance, or foolishness. Life must have its little pleasures, after all. If by chance opportunity knocks, and someone insists on proving themselves more clever than you are, wouldn't it be somewhat foolish not to indulge them? Though, a small word of advice. If you ever find yourself employing Nasruddin's subtle strategy, never reveal what you're up to. Explaining the joke ruins it, just as explaining your strategy defeats its purpose. But let's return to our hero. Nasruddin's wit inevitably attracted challengers, often self-styled intellectual giants who swiftly found themselves humbled. One morning, a traveling scholar arrived in Nasruddin's town, eager to demonstrate his superior intellect. Spotting a local idler leaning casually against a wall, the scholar approached haughtily. "You there? Is this the town of the famous Mullah Nasreddin? I've come to challenge him to a battle of intelligence, which he'll surely lose within moments." The local nodded slowly. "Nasreddin's smart enough, I suppose, but no match for a genius like yourself." Irritated, the scholar snapped, "Stop your pointless chatter and take me to Nasreddin immediately." "Gladly," said the man lazily. "But there's a slight problem. I must keep holding up this wall, or it might collapse. Would you hold it up in my place while I fetch Nasruddin?" Annoyed yet eager to demonstrate his superiority, the scholar pressed himself firmly against the wall, waiting impatiently. Minutes passed, then hours. Sweating under the afternoon sun, the scholar stood faithfully braced against the wall. Eventually, curious townspeople asked him, "What on earth are you doing?" "I'm waiting for Nasreddin," he replied angrily. "Some fool asked me to hold this wall until he returned with the mullah." The villagers burst out laughing, and one finally shook his head, smiling knowingly. "Friend, the fool who left you holding up this wall was Nasruddin himself." Nasruddin's folly, gently humorous yet insightful, reminds us that sometimes our greatest wisdom lies in recognizing, and perhaps even embracing, just how foolish we all really are. But if only fools think they're wise, and only the wise know they're fools, then tell me, which are you? I only ask because many years ago, I learned a hard but valuable lesson. Just because you have something smart or insightful to say doesn't mean you should. I know it sounds obvious, but I learned at a young age, most people do not want to hear your insight, especially if it is sharp and on point. You pierced through the veil, provoked reflection, and destroyed the illusion, and some people just don't like that. There's a strange and uncomfortable truth lurking beneath all this, that wisdom, for all its dignity, may be less suited to life than we'd like to believe, and that folly, though ridiculous, may be what keeps the whole theater running. So perhaps somewhere along the way, the joke stops being a strategy and becomes a kind of wisdom all its own. This is why you never invite a philosopher to a party, especially not Diogenes. At least if you want to have a good time, that is. Though I suppose the definition of a good time varies. Anyways, you're hosting a pool party. The food is warm, the water's wet, and the music is agreeable. The wine is flowing, the small talk is effortless, and everyone is happily exaggerating their job titles. He hasn't brought anything except his lantern. He takes a long look around, announces that he sees no men, only frivolous women, and proceeds to eat directly from the charcuterie board with his filthy hands, like someone claiming ownership of the whole spectacle. He doesn't sit. He mocks the playlist. He tells your guests their lives are meaningless. And then, just for good measure, he pisses in the pool. Naturally, he's ruined everything, but he's told the truth. So what now? Do we thank him, or do we just never invite him again? Nothing is more foolish, Erasmus reminds us, than wisdom out of place. That may be Diogenes' deepest failure, or perhaps his truest wisdom. He reminds us that the spell we're under is just that, a spell. But also, like a good joke, he ruins it in the telling. And in doing so, he doesn't just expose the foolishness, he becomes the fool, because he's in a place where he doesn't belong. And that's the real irony. He's either a fool in fact, by being where he shouldn't be, or he pretends to be a fool in order to stay. Either way, he is the fool. What else is society if not a comedy of masks and costumes, a stage of endless performance, held together by shared illusion? Destroy the illusion, Erasmus warns, and the play is ruined. It may not be truth and reason that bind society together, but something softer and stranger. Illusion, folly, a touch of madness, the ability to see others and ourselves, not as we are, but as we need to believe we are. But even this self-deception, Erasmus reminds us, is not without value. Folly's magic enables husbands to tolerate wives, and wives to tolerate husbands. In this sense, folly is not the joke, but the glue, the invisible spell that lets the whole mess hold together. Without it, we might be left with what Erasmus calls a hideous parade, each person trapped in their own grotesque spectacle, unable to see themselves clearly, and even less able to live with others. It is not ignorance, but insight that often leads to despair. The wise run to unluckiness, Erasmus says, and some, he warns, hang themselves next door to wisdom. Meanwhile, the unwise live in satisfaction, both in their own eyes and in the wondering gaze of the many. And who has ever prayed to be delivered from folly's sweet embrace? Perhaps that's how one truly attains to wisdom, by taking folly as a guide. It's a funny image, isn't it? A solemn philosopher, led by the hand like a small child, not by Apollo, or God forbid Christ, but by folly herself, the feminine anima, both oracle and jester. Perhaps Nietzsche was right when he said, "Truth is a woman." But maybe she doesn't love only a warrior. So yes, maybe the laughter's a little hollow. Maybe the fool knows too much. But he still laughs, because it's the only way back into the world. So play the fool, bow to the farce, if only to stay in the play a little longer. There may be belonging in the comedy, redemption in the mask, and if you're lucky, a little wisdom hidden in the laughter.